So there's this idea of a paternity index, also called a system index. It's the chance that the alleged father transmitting that allele, the obligate allele, versus an unrelated individual in the population. The unrelated individual estimate comes from the allele frequency of that obligate allele, right? Because that's your estimate of how often you see that allele out in the population. It's a likelihood ratio. For any locus, this equals the likelihood that the father can transmit the allele, if he was the father, and that likelihood comes from what? The relatedness. If he's the father, the probability that he's going to give an allele to a son is a half, right? So for any locus, this equals the likelihood the alleged father can transmit the allele. If he's homozygous, it's going to be 1. Because you're saying, is this guy the possible father? If he's homozygous at that locus, child has 1 copy, then he had a 100% chance of transmitting that allele to the son. So it's the ratio of the likelihood that he can transmit it divided by the frequency of that allele that you're examining in the population. So 1 over P or half over P. 1 if he's homozygous, half if he's heterozygous. Pretty simple. If 2 alleles, then the PI is 1 over P1 plus P2 or 0.5 over P1 plus P2. The total is across all loci. And because the loci are independent, you can then multiply to get the likelihood ratio, right? Or combined paternity index. It's just multiplying between loci. So the work really comes in at each locus, defining the likelihood ratio for each locus. Once you have it, it's the same thing, multiplying through because you're independent. It's a measure of the strength of the genetic evidence. It's not a probability. It's a number like 40,000 or 500,000 because it's a likelihood ratio. It's a little bit different now. It's saying that it's 500,000 times more likely that this person is the biological father of the child than a randomly ungenotyped man. And you saw that, RMNE, right? That we get to that. So in Europe, they set a threshold of 1,000 so that the likelihood ratio states the alleged father is 1,000 times as likely to be the biological father as compared to an unrelated man from the same population. In the USA, the required paternity index can be as less than 100. There's no national standard for that. Most people who do testing in this country use the European standard. 1,000 times, okay? It can be from 0 to infinity because it just depends on how many loci you have and what the likelihood ratio for each of the loci are. Some might give you a good likelihood ratio, some may give you no information. It just depends on what the genotypes are. You know what the relatedness is because he's possibly the father. If it's 1, it means the genetic test provides no genetic information for that locus. Doesn't mean it's an exclusion. If it's between 0 and 1, the evidence is more consistent with non-paternity. Makes sense. Greater than 1, it's more consistent with the assertion the tested man is the father than a random person, right? Okay.